Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to tell a story. I think you're really going to enjoy the story, but also, more importantly, it really comes back to some of the things we talk about here on Point of View. The book really is divided into family and then into business and faith. And as we have sometimes talked about, individuals that have used their God-given ability to take a business or an idea to fruition, I think you're really going to enjoy that. But the journey as well is going to be one that I think will be an encouragement to you. And it all is tied into this book, which I have in front of me, 270 pages, Uncommon Threads, Weaving a Life Through Family, Business, and Faith. John Wieland is with us. Might just mention that even though he is the head of this company and could have just as easily called on the phone, decided to fly down to Dallas even yesterday, so you were here ahead of time. And for our listeners up there in WPEO in Peoria, as you and I were talking before the air, I've gone up to Peoria many times, spoken at Bradley, spoken at various events, spoken at some various churches and all the rest. You decided to come down here, so it is great to have you in studio here today.
Thank you. I wanted to meet Kerby in person.
And I might just mention that the easy story is that you took a bankrupt company that had about 50 employees to now close to nearly 1,000 with revenue, I think last time I looked, about $300 million in revenue. So that's a story unto itself. But your own story about family and faith, even developing the first foundation that you have developed, ideas that came from a Larry Burkett book, who we've talked about on this program, are really significant. So in some respects, your book takes us through all sorts of areas, but I guess we should start with the fact that you were actually referred to as awful. And that one made me laugh out loud. So we've got to start with your family, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had a great mom and dad, and my mom and dad, I had two sisters, and they called them Felicia and Melanie. They're just majestic names, roll off the top of your tongue, and for the two boys, they could only come up with John and Dick. And so to compensate for their lack of creativity, they gave us nicknames.
Yes.
And my brother, his nickname was Magic.
Yes.
And that is just a beautiful nickname. I mean, you're, just self-esteem. But my nickname was just awful. And it wasn't an awful nickname. It was actually Johnny Awful. And so that was my nickname growing up. But to be honest with you, most of the time my dad called me Johnny Awful, I was doing something very irreverent that was very funny.
Yeah.
And we lived...
and he was a doctor, by the way.
My dad was a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a nurse. She committed her time at home. Every family has certain levels of dysfunction. Mm-hmm. So we're no different. But there was a peace and serenity growing up where all people mattered. And we invested in people who didn't have the resources that we did, and just a really pleasant upbringing.
Yeah, and a rather mischievous dog, and a few other things I learned from your book as well. But let's, if we can, maybe fast forward, because I really want to get into the business. But even early on, you tell some really powerful stories. I mean, you didn't wait till the end of the book. Chapter 2, 4 adoptions and 1 abortion. Now, we talked about abortion last hour, and then you said, no, we can talk about this issue of abortion this hour as well. And I thought it was, again, a reminder that people now see your success. People see the family that you have raised. And I might even point out the fact that, you've got kids and all sorts of great stories, 4 kids through adoption. But there's another part of that as well. And you were honest enough to be so vulnerable about that.
Yeah, it was when I was in high school, and I was pretty narcissistic growing up.
Well, sure.
And this young lady became pregnant, and at that point in time, I didn't even consider adoption. I just knew I was going to go off to college, and we chose to have an abortion. And 38 years later, I connected with this lady. I sent her a copy of the book because I included it in the book, and I wanted her to touch it and feel affirmed. The only thing I said about the adoption was I think I paid for it.
Abortion, yeah.
I paid for the abortion.
Yeah.
And then she wrote back, and very nice. And she said, well, this is what I remember. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt.
Please. Yeah.
So I told her my memory was I paid for the abortion. She had different memories. She said, I remember you telling me you had plans for college and that we were too young. I remember being at the abortion clinic, sitting on a beanbag chair in the waiting room, waiting for them to call my name. I remember the pain of the procedure. I remember sitting in a recliner after the procedure, feeling numb and cold and empty, looking around, wondering what I had done and wondering if I'd go to hell for taking this soul's life. I remember seeing you for the first time afterwards. I remember not wanting to be intimate. I remember you saying it was important for me to have intercourse again so I would not be bitter. I remember you going off to college that fall. Not a month goes by that I don't wonder what my child would have looked like,
Yes.
what my child would have become. I count my child as one of my own, my oldest. I had a ceremony for my child's death. I pray for my child's soul.
Wow.
Different memories, wouldn't you say, Kerby?
Don't you say? And again, I don't want people to think this is all about that. That's just one of the chapters, because there are a good number of reasons why people want to get the book. One is that one, because you could certainly use that to make a pro-life case. Later on, you have a whole chapter on leadership principles, and I've taught leadership, and these were really well done, and some things we'll talk about as well. You talk about your first foundation, which is, again, how we can maybe, if we have a business or a corporation or a nonprofit or something like that, begin to invest in other kinds of ministries. So each one of these chapters has some really good material, and so I thought that was one of the reasons why we might talk about that. But okay, you went off to college. Western is where you went to school, and then you, of course, had to take a CPA exam and some things like that. So tell us that story real quickly, if you might.
Well, I fell in love with my wife, Julie, during the time we were supposed to study for the CPA exam, and we were told not to fall in love because you had to work.
Yes.
And so I fell in love. I went to a review course. To make a long story short, I was ill-prepared. A friend of mine was ultimately prepared. He scored all 90s on his 4 parts, and he passed. I scored a 75, which is the lowest, a 76, a 77,
and an 80.
And an 80.
Yeah.
And when he saw me in Chicago at the award banquet, he was like, Wieland, what are you doing here? And I said, that's the first time I realized in God's grace. And for that guy, it was the first time he questioned the existence of God. So
you both passed.
We both passed.
But for very different reasons.
Absolutely.
But again, that's another funny story. By the way, I might just mention this book is just full of illustrations, which make you smile as well. But we'll come back and continue our conversation with John Wieland. Uncommon Threads. Fascinating book. We'll talk about that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Wieland in studio with us today. By the way, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You may just want to sit back and listen, and that's good. But I hope you'll take some notes, because in just a few minutes, we're going to get into maybe some of these leadership principles, and all of us are leaders in one way or another. But John, just before we get to the book, you started out by saying when people ask, you were asking, how do you write a book? You said, well, you need to know what the end is in mind. And you're going, well, how do I do that? It's all interconnected. connected between family and business and faith. But there is a sense in which, whether you intended to or not, this book hits so many different points. We just talked about abortion a minute ago. One of the other issues we're talking about a lot here at Point of View is the issue of race. And you have a chapter in there called Jerseyville, and you even had a pastor from Ferguson, Missouri. We know, again, some of the significance there. And that was, again, where, even though it's a short chapter, you even get into this whole issue of race and racial reconciliation, don't you?
Yes. Actually, the title of the book is Jerseyville. There's a lot of white people there. When you can name the 3 black families in the town, it's pretty pasty white. And I actually experienced my first form of racism when I was in high school, when there was a young man who came to our school who was a person of color, and he was not treated well on the basketball team by a coach. First time I ever saw that. Very ugly. Fast forward it. During the Ferguson deal with the Michael Brown and the burning of the city and all that type of stuff, about a year later, I had a pastor from Ferguson spend the night with me. And it was like, oh, this is so great. I could ask him questions. And so I said, what happened? Because anytime a response is exaggerated based on what happened, there's something underlying. And he said that's what happened in Ferguson. It used to be the city police would embrace the pastors, and they would help them out. They could come, sit around the police station and just talk about issues. And then a new guy came in and cut that whole thing out, started giving tickets. And so when the Michael Brown thing happened, because I told the guy, I said, look, if I'm from Jerseyville and a thug ends up getting shot by the police, I'm going to feel really sorry for their family, but I'm not going to burn down the city. And he said, that's absolutely right. Michael Brown was a troubled kid. My people came out, and we used the opportunity to protest because we were being a little bit harassed by the police about tickets and stuff. But he said, then there was the outside element that came in and then just blew it all up. And therefore, you couldn't have the legitimate dialogue that needed to be taken. And you ended up with the extreme opinions on both sides of an issue.
Polarization, tribalism, all the things that we are talking about so often here on business. So in the culture, I should say, because I want to get into the issue of business. But I just want to point out that even though we'll talk a lot about your business and how you grew it and really try to apply biblical principles, you do touch on many different topics as we work our way through the book. And I might just mention, if you find yourself saying, I'm kind of interested in this book, we have, of course, a link to your website, which is uncommonthreadsbook.com. There's where you can even see some samples and all the information about it. Of course, we've posted information about it on the website as well. And I've certainly enjoyed the conversation here. And as a matter of fact, you gave me a copy that's autographed, so I'm going to take it home to my wife because I've been talking about some of the things you get into in the book. But for a while, let's spend some time in business, because the second part of your book is on business. And this is where you basically learn some things about the fact that we have the wrong mindset of business. I win, you lose, zero-sum game. Your argument is just the opposite. Business is one where we win together. It's a team sport. And I think, if anything, Christians should be looking for that, number one, in terms of a win-win scenario. And also, can I throw in another word, servant leadership, which you talk about as well. And it seems to me that whenever I have one of you that are very successful in business, and I've talked to one of the top architects in the country, I've talked to a couple of people that have been with various companies that are working in the area of batteries or in home goods or whatever, or food service or whatever. In every one of those cases where we've had a chance to talk to some of these Christian CEOs, every one of them talks about the fact that when I came in with my Christian convictions into this company, I had to change some things, because the world's mindset about business is not a biblical mindset, is it?
No. when we went into business early on in my career, I had a leader come up to me and say to me, John, I'm a Christian, but I will not let that get in the way of me taking care of business.
Yes.
And so from that day, I said I did not want to be that person. And so when I went in and bought MH equipment, we were going to attempt to run the business on biblical principles.
Right.
And so one of the primary thing is we are privately held, and so we can make decisions that is in the best interest of the long-term health of the employees in the company. One thing that I learned, and I think people should listen to this, when you chase numbers, you make bad decisions.
You've said that in the book, and of course, you're a numbers guy for sure.
I'm a bean counter by trade, but the publicly traded companies, they have such a challenge because they're chasing numbers. Right. And when you chase numbers for short-term gain, so often it's a wrong decision for the long-term health. And some of the principles that I learned embracing a company is from a secular standpoint, our leadership, we bow to the health of the enterprise. Mm-hmm. It's not about toys or, extravagant salaries for the leaders. We're more concerned about the health of the company as opposed to the wealth of the owners.
Sure.
And if you take care of the company, you'll maybe end up with both. But if you go into business thinking about all the perks that you can get, you may end up with neither.
Yeah. And again, we've had the CEOs of Hobby Lobby on this program, Interstate Batteries, Chick-fil-A, those kinds of individuals. And in so many cases, they have told stories about doing what is best for the employees, which probably hurt the bottom line. Not the least of which is we won't be open on Sunday. Just think that one through for just a minute. Or we'll close early on Saturday. That's Hobby Lobby. Or, we will provide chaplaincy services or all sorts of things that if you're just looking at it from a numbers nerd perspective, from a bottom line perspective, make no sense. But if you're really investing in the people in your company, then it makes a great deal of sense.
Well, so during COVID, we made the decision in 2020 that we would not lay anybody off.
Yes.
And at that point in time, we thought that we could lose $3 to $5 million. We just were not going to do that because we felt, doesn't it make common sense to take some of our equity and put it back into the people who helped create the equity in the first place? And so during a 3-month period, we had provided over 11,000 hours of charity time to our technicians to keep them employed. They'd go to food banks. They'd mow old people's yards. They'd go to other ministries just to keep everybody employed. And that was a good day for MH Equipment. And we actually demonstrated that we meant it when people matter.
So good. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of these leadership principles. You've got a whole section on leading leaders. You also have a section here on how to take Jesus into the boardroom and how to take Jesus into the business. And that's really a very significant issue. Then when we get into values and culture, which are, as you say, are kind of the secret sauce, and a story that just made me laugh out loud, where you were having this long-term planning day, and you had everything pretty much up there for MH, and so you have the proposals, the organizational structure, the customer service, the employee investment. So then Mary turns to you and says, okay, John, are you ready to go? And you say, no. And I want to tell that story because you basically were explaining the fact that, yes, we have our mission, we have our vision, but we also have our values. And how many times have even believers sometimes in the business world have lost sight of that? So if you find yourself saying, this is quite a book, it covers so many different topics that we address here on Point of View, I think you'll enjoy that. And if you go to the website right now, you will see the links that we've made available so that you can contact John. Matter of fact, you might want to have him come and speak to your group sometime. And, of course, his book, and it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth.
But our staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with us, John Wieland. We're talking about his book, which is entitled Uncommon Threads, Weaving Life Through Family, Business, and Faith. I want to capitalize on that idea of faith, although we'll come back to business in just a minute, because you established what was called the First Foundation back in 2001. Now, again, I have been so impressed. For example, the CEO and the founder of Hobby Lobby wrote a book, and we had him in studio talking about the fact that you should give it all away. Can't outgive God. But you made that decision to establish this First Foundation at a time when you had just lost, are you ready for this? $700,000 in July of 2001. And what a time to bring up the idea of establishing a foundation. I do believe some of that comes back to the influence of a man by the name of Larry Burkett. I read this aloud to my
Kirby.
wife. And I think in some respects, I have seen time and time again where if individuals, even if they're broke, decide to tithe, and I'm a firm believer in this, decided to give, and even businesses and even other ministries say, you know, we are going to give away, that God will bless that in ways that don't make sense to those of you that are numbers guys. Because I don't know how, again, people can say, I can actually live on 90% instead of 100%. And yet I do better than if I tried to live on 100%. So from a worldly point of view, that makes no sense. But from a spiritual, biblical point of view, it makes complete sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Back in 2001, my wife and I, when we bought the company in 1994, we always wanted to give back to our community by setting aside funds to make a positive impact, but we just never pulled the trigger. After we bought two companies, triple the size of our company, by the end of 2000, in the first 6 months, we lost over $700,000.
Unbelievable.
And I just felt like this was the time. And so the executive team, we agree to start His First Foundation, where we give 10% to the foundation to come alongside our employees' passions, and we will support acts of kindness, any secular good works that make our communities better off. And we will also support organizations that share the love of Jesus or meet the physical needs of people in His name. We are not ashamed of the gospel. And since we made that decision in July of 2001, we have invested over $20 million
Yes, you have.
to not-for-profits and charitable organizations. And it has been an incredible blessing for our company.
One of the things I love the story, and I read this out loud to my wife, is you had in Bowling Green, Kentucky, an individual in that community was paralyzed from the waist down. So you decided to use some of the foundation money to completely outfit the house so that it would, have ramps and all things that people would know that you would need. So then, of course, they had the people from the news media out there, and they're seeing you retrofit the house, and they're seeing what's happening during the construction. And so immediately the broadcaster on the local news asked your branch manager, well, how do you know this young man? And he says, well, we really don't. So then she's kind of confused. Oh, well, do his parents work for a good customer of yours? Well, we don't know his parents or where they work. And so her final question is, well, then why are you doing this? Well, he says, we believe all people matter. What a great testimony. But again, talk about a great testimony to the watching world about what it means to be generous, what it means to be involved in the community at a time when a lot of people are complaining that these corporations come in and strip people of jobs, they don't pay them well enough, and they aren't really interested in our community. What a great testimony.
Yeah, we're definitely not like name it, claim it. Like if you give $1,000, God's going to give you $10,000. Okay, we do not believe that He's our Santa Claus up in the sky, but there is principles that if you are faithful with your resources, in a little bit He will give you your resources to take care of more.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of feel like doing things that demonstrates our tagline that all people matter, it'll play out. And it's played out well for us, not expecting it's going to be financially beneficial, but it's never wrong to do the right thing. And we're here primarily as believers to reveal the glory of God and to increase the fame of his Son. And so that's what we try to do in my position as leader of MH Equipment, is to be used by him, take opportunity to reveal his glory and increase his fame of the Son.
One of the things I love about your book is your friend Jim has actually done the illustrations. Of course, you have the one illustration here where you are pointing out the fact that you wanted to give 10% to his foundation, and somebody in the back of the room saying, John, we have lost $700,000 so far this year. But it brings me to another diagram where, as I mentioned just before we went to the break, and this gets us into your values, you'd had this very long conversation, and it was a 3-day session and a 4-year strategy on sales and growth and revenue and all the rest. And so finally Mary asked, basically, John, are you committed? And you go, absolutely not. You must really shake up some of these meetings, but explain why you said absolutely not.
Well, the reason I told Mary is that we will never do anything that will violate our value statements. Our value statements are the filters that we use to make every decision. And so we're not going to chase numbers like I said before. And we never did hit the revenue targets that we did. We did hit the profit targets. So figure that out.
Yes.
And I just feel like success in business is staying in your lanes and not get out of your value statements, because then it starts to cause dysfunction within the entire organization when the employees see the leaders not living up to the value statements that they have on their walls. Mm-hmm. Mary said that she had spent time with Fortune 500 people, the Army, the Navy, and she said, I've never seen a company whose value statements on their wall were so close to reality. Mm-hmm. And so when we make a decision about employees, the thing that we ask is our value statements. Are we providing a safe and encouraging environment?
Safe place, yeah.
Are we recognizing integrity? Are we inspiring passion? Are we enabling personal growth? And that's why we send employees to the Family Life Marriage Conference.
I was going to talk about that next.
Because we can't make people grow, but we can create an environment where if they choose to grow, they can.
And again, you have a wonderful story from an individual that sent them. And again, if people are not familiar, although I would imagine most of them are, because over the years we've interviewed individuals that have worked with Family Life Today, the radio broadcast, and a number of others. But here you say, if we can build into these individuals, we want them to make sure that their marriages are strong and send them to Family Life conferences, Weekend to Remember. And again, that's just another one of those great things that you have provided for your particular employees. And it kind of brings us to one of your chapters. So you want to take Jesus to the office. How do we do that? Because a lot of CEOs and even business people and executive directors might go, I don't even know how to do that. And yet you have a whole chapter on that, don't you?
Yes. And there are just some basic principles. And I always get a giggle on the first principle. And the first principle of taking Jesus to the office is this: do not suck at your job.
Yes.
You work for the high king, the King of glory. You can't. And so I feel like Christians, they should not be workaholics, but they should be coveted.
There should be excellence.
They should be excellence.
Yeah.
And so there's just, there's things that being honest about your brokenness, don't be a one-trick pony. If someone asks you what time it is, don't say, did you know God told us to number our days? Tell the dude it's 2:30. You don't want people to feel, don't go to him because he's just always going to talk to you about it, Yeah. And, also get to know people's story.
Right.
Respect people's boundaries. Don't be warm and cozy to the opposite sex. Be kind and respectful.
Yeah.
That's a whole chapter in itself, because that can really get you into trouble, especially people like me who are extroverted.
Yeah.
I've learned that being warm and cozy has got me into problems.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be kind and respectful.
Well, again, there's a whole section in that chapter. We'll come back. Maybe we'll finish off a few others and also talk about some of these leadership principles, because that's worth the price of the book as well. And so just again, if you find yourself just joining the broadcast, we're talking today in studio with John Wieland. The book is entitled Uncommon Threads, Weaving a Life Through Family, Business, and Faith. We've tried to hit each one, but we'll have one more segment to hit a couple other key points right after these important messages.
The View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention we do have a link to uncommonthreadsbook.com. There's a place, of course, if you'd like to get a copy of the book. There's also some video there. But most importantly, let me encourage you, there's a button that says Contact, and that's a place where you could actually email John, and perhaps you would want to have him come and speak to your business group. I know you aren't in the book writing business. This is kind of a one-off, but at the same time, it is a fascinating book. And for people that are wanting to know how to bring their Christian convictions into the marketplace, we've had some very gifted individuals over the years. Raymond Harris comes to mind. Of course, I've mentioned some of the individuals that have been working with Interstate Battery and Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby and the rest. But again, you're a small group of individuals, and anytime I can encourage Christians in the business world to live out their Christian life, that is the case. And so if they'd want to contact you, they can do so. But I've been talking about, but we haven't gotten to that chapter on leading leaders. Can you give us some principles there?
Yeah, so leading leaders, this is not the ultimate list. This is not like the 10 Commandments, okay? Okay, so this is 7 ideas from some guy, okay? But leading leaders, the first thing is you have to remember that your authority begins and ends at the seat that you sit in.
I love that line.
And so when people laugh at your stupid jokes and give the obligatory chuckle, or they think that, they say, hey, did you lose 10 pounds when you've actually gained 10 pounds? Or you say something stupid and they're still nodding like inquisitively. No, that is just the chair you're sitting in. And when your other leaders know that it's all a little bit of hogwash, it just creates an environment where people don't resent it.
So good. And you learned that the kids in your neighborhood liked your parents more than they liked you. I love that story there.
Yes, they did.
So that was another aspect early on that applies to this. Go ahead, the second one.
Every voice in the room is important.
Right.
The Bible says, hey, out of the mouth of babes. So there's people that I really don't even care for, but I'll listen to what they have to say, because truth can come from any place.
So good.
Don't lose leaders because you're greedy. Try to figure out how to put more money in their pocket as opposed to trying to figure out how to withhold.
Right.
I always say a private offense requires a private apology.
I thought that was a very good one.
Public offense requires a public apology. If you misbehave in a big meeting, don't go to the break and talk to the person personally and apologize. You apologize in the place where you committed the offense. You need a freedom to fight. The nice thing about having a private company, we all want the same thing. And so we have to have the freedom to be able to argue, and then afterwards go out and have fun and relax and be on the same page. It's good for the leader to be the butt of the joke sometimes.
I love that one, number 6, because they make fun of you, and you just don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah. But the key thing, it has to be good-natured, okay? They can't belittle the leader, but they can have good nature. And then the last thing is use we were going to do it this way because I'm the boss. Use that card like once every 5 years. You just never do that unless a situation demands it, and it shouldn't be demanded but once every 4 or 5 years. And so those are like 7 of the principles that I've come up with. And again, it's not a complete list. It's something that I've learned over the years, keeping strong leaders within the organization.
And again, I love how you said that. It's not like this is the 10 Commandments, and it isn't like I had them all at once. I learned them by looking in the mirror and figuring out what worked and didn't. And you also go on to talk about the kind of decisions you have to make. Some are low importance, and again, that is the case. And you have some that require additional input from leaders before you make that decision. Then you have decisions where consensus is desired because it affects the entire enterprise. And then important decisions where you have to go against the group. And these are good principles, whether you're running a business or whether you're on a deacon board or an elder board, you're a pastor, or even in your own home. If you don't try to make everything a federal case, as you used to say it, and recognize a lot of decisions aren't that important, or if you're going to make a decision that affects everybody in the church, everybody in the family, everybody in the business, and you make it unilaterally, that's a quick way to scare people right out the door, isn't it?
And you will lose other strong leaders.
Yes. And so, again, you've just got some great principles about this whole idea of secret sauce and where to develop all that. But since we only have a few minutes left, I thought for just a minute you might talk to future leaders, even right now, that are in a position of leadership. I don't care if you are a CEO of a company, whether you're maybe a leader in your Sunday school class, or if you're just a parent, you're a leader. And it seems to me that some of the principles you have in the book apply at every level, and we seem to be violating these leadership principles all the time, don't we?
Yeah, we do, and I'm no exception. And people ask about what should I do, what job should I take, and should I do this or should I do that? What do you think God wants me to do? And I know why we do that, because He tells us to bring everything to Him. Mm-hmm. But I tell people this: what God wants is for Kerby and John to wake up this morning and be faithful.
That's it.
Be faithful to Him.
That's right.
Now, the reason we want to know whether or not we should take this job or that job is God is not bound by time, and He knows what tomorrow will bring. But whether you take this job or that job, I know what He will want of them. He will want them to wake up each day and attempt to be faithful and to share the glory of God and to minister out the social gospel, meeting the needs of people in Jesus' name. And that's what we're called to do. And do not be ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God. And I just had a situation where I was supposed to speak, and someone asked me not to say the name of Jesus in my speech. And I said, I am talking about Jesus in a historical fact, as a historical figure. I'm not claiming He was the Son of God. I wasn't claiming that He died on the cross for our sins. I claimed that He was the one who said it's more blessed to give than to receive. And he went ahead and he backed off on his request. I gave the 10-minute speech, and they all stood up at the end of the 10 minutes. And God was honored.
Yes. And
whether they were Christians or not, they knew two things of that speech. One, Jesus is the guy who said it's more blessed to give than to receive.
Right.
And then I also talked about how close He is to special needs people.
Yeah.
And so people who didn't know much about Jesus in that talk, they heard two pretty cool things about Him.
Yeah. And maybe they would get even more curious and inquisitive and want to use that as well. So, again, if people want to contact you, we have a link to your website. And I know you're heading back to our good friends up there at WPEO in Peoria. So I'm looking forward to maybe next time I'm up there, come see you and see your business.
Oh, I'd love that.
But thank you for actually taking the time to fly down and be in the studio. And it's been a privilege, first of all, to meet you through your book and now to meet you face to face. So thank you.
Kerby, it is a high honor meeting you. You have served our country well, and so I so appreciate the time you've given me.
Well, that's all we have for today. If you find yourself saying, okay, I got to read this book, we have the information on our website, and about 270 pages, very delightful with all sorts of illustrations, which made it very interesting as well. Lots of great principles, and so I would encourage you to find out more about Uncommon Threads by John Wieland. I want to also thank Andrew for his help as the engineer today, and John as well, behind him, Steve, as our producer. So we have to say goodbye. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.